Good afternoon and welcome to the Happy Recap Podcast. I'm JB along with EJ, and we are glad to have you along with us for this show. The date of the recording is March 15th, and although part of it was recorded yesterday on the 14th, as we were making our way through a Monday, an off day in spring training for the New York Mets. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by our good friend Justin Toscano from NorthJersey.com. He joined me yesterday from 31 Piazza Drive in Port St Lucie at Clover Park. And I tell you, the one thing, EJ, about Clover Park, getting used to that new name, as it's had quite a few over the years, I still want to call it Clover Field because of the movie a few years ago. But Clover Park is the name of the field. So if you hear me say it wrong, you can point and laugh.
You can call it four-leaf clover for all I care, as long as the results are there.
Yeah, and right now some of the things going on at spring training are definitely mid-season form, but there's not usually a lot of highlight worthy events that go on in spring training. Luis Guillermo has now provided two of them over the past couple of years. Of course, the infamous and super awesome bat catch a couple of years ago, and now the 22 hit at bat yesterday. The stuff that legends are made for. I referred to him in the interview we recorded yesterday as Mr. March for the New York Mets. And oddly enough, about 10 minutes after we recorded the interview, Harry Rose also referred to Guillermo as Mr. March. So I guess I'm prognosticating here, but I don't know if you've had a chance to see the footage or if you saw it live, but that was one seriously impressive piece of hitting at a time where some guys would be justifiably 10 swings. All right, I'm just closing my eyes and see what happens. And if I'm out, I'm out. He really put the work in.
I mean, not only did I see it, I probably forwarded it to at least a dozen friends who might not have had a chance to see it up to that point. But you know what the most amazing thing about that is the fact that he didn't even run it to a 3-2 count until pitch number 20.
No, he did not.
At 19 pitches. He sat at 2-2, and then he finally ran it full. And I mean, it was just so much fun. The at bat itself, you could tell he was locked in. The way the teammates were absolutely going nuts. And I mean, it really points to the fact that we've talked about it on the podcast before. The chemistry that this team has is going to make them once again such a fun follow this summer.
I mean, and the thing about it for me was, you talk about that. I mean, we have, what I think it's 10 or 20% of the crowd are real people right now. And you can definitely hear them. You feel their presence. It's not like an empty ballpark at all with fake crowd noise. It's a genuine, real audience. But the cool thing about that was as you're getting to that 19th, 18th, all those pitches in there, once you really get past 10, actually, the loudest cheering is coming from the bench, and you can hear it. I mean, you can see Pete Alonso's, mouth moving and the sound coming out of it. So you really get a feel for the excitement coming out of it, because not only could you see it, you could hear it. And the thing for me, the biggest thing was, you talk about getting, the third ball on pitch number 20. This is a count that started 0-2. Or I should say, after two pitches was 0-2. And this is a guy, I mean, talk about the ultimate battle back to wind up, eking out a walk. Eke is not the right word, but it's close enough. But because there's no word that does it justice what he did out there. It was simply amazing. And, I think that while I think we all knew all along Guillermo was destined, for this opening day roster for this team, if you're JD Davis, who's also having a pretty decent spring, you've got to be wondering, am I going to wind up in a platoon before long? Because this guy can play.
Yeah, I mean, I had him pegged as my breakout player of this upcoming season, and I'm definitely going to stick by that. And what's interesting is he is taking a lot of reps over at third base, and that at bat was very reminiscent of another former Mets third baseman who his at bats would begin at 0-2 in Mr. David Wright.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, two strikes, so what? I mean, it really comes down to, I mean, that was a professional at bat by a professional hitter in, a situation that, as Justin Toscano will talk about a little while ago, was the guy's entire afternoon. That was 122 pitch at bat, and dude was spent, and understandably so. But yeah, I just look at that at bat, and it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in spring training. But equally cool continues to be the absolute sick midseason, almost unfair to the other hitters performance of one Jacob Degrom, who's performing at Cy Young capable, if not Cy Young favorite numbers. And you know what, guys? He's got both eyes open. Just saying.
I don't want to say that Jake has a chip on his shoulder not winning that third consecutive Cy Young award, but I think Jake has a chip on his shoulder not winning that third consecutive Cy Young award. And I think he is coming out guns blazing this season.
It's not Jake's style. And, I don't claim to know Jake privately by any means whatsoever. But I can't help but think that certain bloopers from certain people who are not signed by this ball club attempting to pitch one-eyed and plunking a guy. If I were Jake, I would really be like, did I seriously lose to that guy?
The best response I saw to that was R.A. Dickey pitched an entire season without an UCL.
Yeah, I mean, that is just, oh my goodness. I just could not believe that particular situation coming out of spring either. But, I think we've been made aware in the last week of a couple, for all of the LOL Mets that have gone over the years. I think we've realized in the past week we've dodged two major bullets, one being Mr. Bauer and the other being the now defunct J-Rod.
Yeah, I don't think Jeff Wilpon is going to be getting any loving calls from his dad anytime soon. Not rubbing his nose in the fact that he was so desperate to have the celebrity power couple be the winning in the bidding of the franchise. I definitely think that Jeff one last time gets to have a nice big fat egg on his face.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about it too for me is, I mean, on this very show early on in our return, I had stated one of my biggest reasons for not wanting J-Rod was the idea of being the McCourts Part 2. And of course, recalling the Dodgers and their previous ownership situation and what happened after the divorce of their owners. Now, these guys weren't even married, and they were trying to buy a team together, and it just seemed like such a horrible idea. Some couples can't handle the commitment of joining the Disney movie club together. That's why my wife and I have separate accounts after 15 years of marriage. Actually, no, it was the 15 free movies, but that's another story. But the commitment level that it takes, and to realize that J-Lo was going to own the Mets every third weekend, that's something that's tough to deal with. And as much as we really, really like Steve Cohen and like what he's doing, at this particular moment, I am equally glad that J-Lo wasn't in the ownership position. Quite frankly, at this point, I would have preferred the Wilpons if we were in the middle of that LOL Mets moment of past years.
I hate to say it, but I totally agree with that. We wanted no part of this headache, no part of this nightmare. And at the end of the day, we got the female Latina owner that we needed, not the one who wanted us, the one who we needed, and the one who has been a beautiful marriage so far with the fans, with the franchise, and up and down the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. The Cohen family has been absolutely a dream come true for the Mets fans, and creates an air of optimism. And certainly that is one of the questions that I'll tackle with Justin Toscano as we head into that interview here. And then when we're done with that interview, you and I can come back and kind of chat it through.
I'll be here.
Cool.
You're watching the Happy Recap podcast. I am JB. EJ's had to step away for a bit, and joining us is our good friend from NorthJersey.com, Justin Toscano, checking in from 31 Piazza Drive in Port St Lucie. And I got to tell you, from the background, it looks like a pretty nice day there.
Yeah, no, it's a great day. I guess I'll just turn my phone real quick. Empty ballpark. There's never a more peaceful thing than an empty ballpark after a ball game. But yeah, it's a great day. It was actually pretty chilly this last week, chilly being relative, to here. But yeah, nice day, 75, 80 degrees, sun shining, not a lot of clouds, only a couple clouds in the sky. You can't really ask for anything better. And, it just all means that baseball, the real baseball that matters, is almost here.
It's one of those things. You mentioned an empty ballpark, and certainly we had our share of those last year. But as crowds start to return, it's kind of an empty ballpark after a game. That feels like normalcy compared to the empty ballparks during the games.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and even still, like with the limited capacity, there's I probably couldn't turn my phone and show you because it's too far, but behind home plate, there's still some cardboard cutouts here, and I'm just like, they're just disgusting. It's like a disease. Like I don't ever want to think about like the cardboard cutout empty ballpark era. It's so nice to have people back, and I think Kevin Pillar said a couple days ago just how refreshing it is to that it signifies some normalcy returning. But even the limited capacity fans, get pretty loud here and there, and it still feels like a normal day at the ball yard. And that's been the best part, honestly, is just like last season felt so watered down just because of all, not only the protocols, which were necessary, but the empty ballparks and people not being able to come to the games. And it just stinks because like the play baseball, the reason, for the fans. And these guys always talk about it. They're entertainers for the fans. And so to get fans back is just so nice. And it's God, I could ramble on it for an hour, but it's just it is really refreshing to see people just like enjoying the game again, even socially distanced. They've got, the berm boxed off in terms of boxes there you can purchase, seats here and there tied with elastic so you can't sit in them for distancing. But even still, it's like, it's felt normal. Like it's not like I don't even notice like people are keeping distance and they're doing measures here, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like we're living in like the pandemic times. Because it's like some normalcy is returned, and that's just it's almost like a weight lifted off everybody's shoulders.
So I was going to ask. I mean, you talked in great length about the measures last season that you were going through, and as far as reporting every game, how have they changed?
Okay, so in terms of the reporting aspect itself, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, not really in terms of that. Now, the access is better here in spring training because last year we couldn't leave the press box. And that was a big thing. Even summer camp, we couldn't leave the press box. So I used my $20 Target binoculars more than, in that month than I had probably in the 2 years that I had them previously. And but here we can like go out to the backfields. It's really nice. You can chat with, guys and people who work for the team at a distance, and because it's easy to do so here. Now you still can't have contact with those people in tier one in terms of like you can't go in the clubhouse, no one-on-one interviews that way in person. But the backfield access has been great. You can go, watch from the Stadium Bowl like you could. The only thing being is now that you can't go in the dugouts on the backfields like we used to be able to. You just have to stay and watch from outside the fence. Which I guess you kind of get used to, even though it's a little worse. And you can't watch from the stadium field, like the dugout in the stadium. You can only watch from the stadium bowl. But it's like it's almost like we're conditioned to have these like COVID measures that you don't like. For me, like it kind of just got used to it. But in terms of the biggies, like the clubhouse, we're still not allowed in there. Hopefully, we're making headway on that. With the vaccine getting out and whatnot. So the reporting in terms of the interviewing has come, via like for me, phone calls that I might make myself or Zoom calls from the team, setting those up with Luis Rojas and various players and GM, acting GM Zach Scott, Sandy Alderson. So it's been much of the same in terms of the Zoom era, which like everything's done over Zoom, which is necessary, but unfortunate. We all can't wait for it to get back to normal. But in terms of like the access in general, I've been pleasantly surprised because for me, I think like spring training is so cool because it's baseball in its purest form. And just like to watch, even today, like a B game out in the backfield, like Matt Allen throwing or like Taiwan Walker throwing, Tomas Nido catching after, fouling a ball off his ankle a couple days ago. That stuff is just so cool because it's like we weren't able to be around it as much last year, even. And I just like being around it and then seeing a lot of that and chatting with a couple of, just saying hey to people and giving people a nod here and there. And it's just, it feels a little more normal in that respect. And that's what I did like about spring training this year. I'm not sure if it's going to be that way during the season, right? Because like, I guess the only field we can go on is the stadium field. And so can we even watch batting practice? Probably not, because we couldn't really go on the field here. So I don't know how that's going to work. So it might be a lot of the same as like last season until they do let us back into the clubhouse, hopefully at some point during the season or, even God will, at the latest next year. But yeah, the access in terms of like how it's been able, to report. Like it's easy to take videos of those backfields and easy to see the bullpens from the top deck and left field over there. So that part has been a pleasant surprise, just because I like being around, the sport at its purest form like that. And I think that's allowed us to see a lot. And so from that aspect, it was actually really good. The Zoom stuff I didn't have high hopes for, just because we knew it was going to be Zoom and not Clubhouse. But that's a really long-winded way of saying that I have really enjoyed watching like the actual baseball that's gone on here.
Now, obviously, we've teased you a bit along the way that you've not had a normal season yet on the beat, and this is certainly not starting off to be necessarily. But in looking at the if you will, aborted spring training last year combined with summer camp and now spring training 2021, obviously the big change is regime change, and I want to know what kind of sense have you gotten, or attitude, or even just observing have you gotten as far as to the air, as it were, over spring training and the optimism of the Steve Cohen era?
Yeah, there's a ton of optimism, and I think publicly the players set the tone for that, in terms of like, from James McCann being that first signing, first big signing, Trevor May being, I guess, the first signing, and he talked about the Steve Cohen effect, and James McCann talked about it, and others have really talked about that this is the right situation for them, because they feel like this team is trying to win. And I think that's a big advantage, and especially a year like this where a lot of teams just decided to stay put over the winter. So there's a lot of optimism from that perspective, and a lot of optimism at the ballpark, because now you're hearing over the loudspeaker, number 12, shortstop Francisco Lindor, and you're hearing about James McCann, and it's like they've still got that young core everybody's excited about, of Alonso, Dom Smith, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's really a lot of optimism around publicly, but I think privately too, there is. And the sense that I've gotten is just that it's been a complete organizational overhaul in some parts, namely player development and R&D. And why those are important for those listening at home is R&D is, another word for that is analytics. And these days, it's kind of been an arms race for organizations to beef up that area. And I think I heard, I think there might have been an R&D, a handful of people dedicated to that, like full time last year. And now I know the whole department, I heard, when they fill out all these positions that they're hiring for, which I think those are publicly posted. I know they're publicly posted. I'm not sure if they filled them yet, but the whole department, I think, is going to be around 17 to 18 people, which is a complete beefing up of that, organization. I think those are estimates based on what I've been told generally. And that's big, again, for the casual fan who may not know a lot about this stuff, because it's like fair to not know a lot about this stuff. Not a lot of us do. And so or have to know about this stuff. That's big, because that's just going to mean that the organization is going to be better able to utilize technology and the numbers that they do get and apply them and create different formulas with that R&D department, namely the data science branch of it. And it's just another way to improve, another way to win ball games, because you're looking at things from a different way. Player development wise, the Mets they hired farm director Kevin Howard, who was previously a minor league coach in the Indian system, and Cleveland system. And he's really received rave reviews in terms of how he relates to players. And the Mets hired him because they wanted to, at least at the minor league level, wanted to strengthen kind of their hitting philosophy. And then they felt he was a great hitting coach because he was, made it up to the big league staff with Cleveland in a hitting capacity his last year there. And they also hired Jeremy Barnes, who will be the director of player, development initiatives there, that'll handle. I've been told he's going to be a little better at handling a little more with the technology and different systems that they work with, whereas Kevin Howard is going to be the farm director. His strength is building relationships. He was a career minor leaguer, a guy who never reached the majors. He knows what these guys are going through, wants to help them achieve their goals. And then I think the sense that I really get is that Steve Cohen has been hands off, and I think that's a good way, right? So hands on, he's been hands on in the sense that he's wanted to give everybody below him the resources to do their jobs, but I don't think he has been too like he hasn't micromanaged. I think there's a very relaxed feel among people who work in the organization that that they will be able to do their jobs and that they'll be given the resources necessary to do them. And the vision really is going to be collaborative. That's a word you hear a lot in baseball. So sometimes it's BS, but I think here it's rang a little true in the sense that, like, Kevin Howard, for example, told me that there's a lot of tasks he'll need to do, but he doesn't believe tasks should be done in a hierarchy. So it's like he's going to be doing everything. And a lot of these decisions they're going to be made collaboratively. Acting GM Zach Scott's a guy with, for example, an analytics background, coming from Boston, but obviously, feel and instincts and everything is so there's so many ways, there's so many decisions that need to be made in organizations these days. And the Mets right now have really focused on making that like a collaborative vision. And, I know for Kevin Howard specifically, that's why he wanted, that's why it was so enticing to him. He told me he didn't know that he would have taken a job like this otherwise, if he couldn't make an impact on the culture right away, because the culture isn't set yet. It's starting to be set, but there's a way for these people to make an imprint. And I think that's the biggest sense, is that it's an era change in terms of who the Mets want to be. And I think, Sandy Alderson said the perception versus reality quote a ton since that introductory press conference in November. And I think the Mets are off to a good start. The product on the field looks better, more talented, not only more talented, but deeper too. They should have better coverage for injuries or unforeseen circumstances that arise. But I think just the way the organization is run, it's a lot deeper. Like you've got, Carter Capps hired as a minor league pitching coach. We've got Hugh Quallenbaum as, minor league hitting coordinator. Kevin Howard, Jeremy Barnes, and on the R&D side, hiring over Ben Zosmer from the Dodgers was really their big move. And now everybody, he's the director of baseball analytics and has been, and, had been in the Dodgers organization for, a good handful of years. And so I think the infrastructure is a lot stronger than it previously was.
Now, looking a little bit on the field, certainly a few storylines that are stringing through the organization. Start with one, as we're recording this on Sunday. I want to start with the one that occurred today. Of course, Reggie Jackson was Mr. October for the Yankees, and I feel like Luis Guillermo is becoming Mr. March for the Mets. Not because it's his only success. I think he's going to play a great role on this year's team, but he has the, let's just say, Florida's known for its magic, as it were, in a certain town, and he's bringing the magic to Port St Lucie. Talk about what will soon be legendary 22 pitch at bat today.
Oh, heck yeah. That it's funny because like Luis Guillermo has a couple of these moments, and we'll get into them, that are just like completely incredibly crazy that you just can't even believe. And yet he's a guy who used to go up, up and down from AAA to the bigs. And I think when you look at him, he's about as undervalued of a player that I can think of, just because of how reliable he is defensively. And he puts together great at bats. Like, I know he doesn't have the pop in his bat that's really, sexy from players these days or whatnot, but he's a very, very solid player. And today he goes up there against poor Jordan Hicks, flame-throwing right-hander, his first action of the Grapefruit League season. First batter he sees is Luis Guillorme, and that's his day's work right there. 22 pitch at bat. It started, actually, the funniest thing to me, one of the funny things, is that Guillorme was down in a 0-2 hole after 2 pitches, and then kept battling back. He had, I think the exact number is 16 balls he fouled off, including 9 in a row. Hicks, rounding up some of the 99.6, readings, but Hicks threw 7 pitches that clocked into 100 in that at bat. And Luis Guillorme, kept hanging in there. Luis Rojas said by pitch 8, the dugout's starting to get into it. The fellas are starting to get amped and really get behind Guillorme. But and everybody thought, Luis Rojas said everybody thought that it was a full count, but no, it was 2-2. So he actually had to take a ball, later on in the count, and it gets to 18, 19, 20. You start hearing the crowd with every pitch start cheering louder and louder after he's fouling them off and fighting in there, and finally takes ball 4 and pitch 22. And obviously Guillorme is a very, very humble guy. He's always short and sweet. So all he had to say about it was he was just glad he could walk, because he was like, all that work wasn't for nothing. And the funny point about that is, in my story, I looked up I found, the eight longest at bats in regular season Major League history. Um, all of them but one ended, in the pitcher's favor, which I thought was really crazy. That it's like you do all this work and it's always tough to get that finishing hit or a walk or something. And if this were a regular season game, Luis Guillorme would be in the record books right now because the previous record, well, still the record for regular season since they started pitch tracking in 1988 is Brandon Belt's 21 pitch at bat in 2018. So Luis Guillorme, at least, an exhibition in the hearts of the spring training faithful here is a guy who's in the record books. 22 pitch at bat. It was pretty crazy. Luis Rojas said he's never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it. And yeah, like I said, albeit in spring training, that was something pretty magical. But I asked Guillorme after because I was curious. I know he had a play, back in 2017 where he caught the bat that was flung, right at the Mets dugout. Really could have. I mean, that thing had some heat on it. And he just nonchalantly had his, was sitting on the railing and arms spread out, and then just snagged the bat. And so I asked him, which one was better, and he said nothing's ever going to top the bat catch. But I mean, that could be true. I mean, it's a video I think you and I were talking about before this. It's a video that you could watch 100 times every day and it probably still wouldn't get old. But that 22 pitch at bat is poor Jordan Hicks. That was it for him. And yeah, and I think he had a full day's work there. The Cardinals made a pitching change after. Luis Guillorme was at first, and yeah, the dugout was going pretty crazy for him, and why not? That was a feat.
So looking a little bit at the pitching, obviously, we'll talk about Mr. Degrom here in a moment, but looking at the rotation beyond him, as we kind of come into this, I mean, Carrasco seems pretty determined that he wants to be ready for opening day. But it's definitely still a question mark to some extent. Talk a little bit about the back of the rotation. I mean, Peterson pitched today, Jordan pitched yesterday. How are they looking? I mean, you look at the box scores, they look a little bit pedestrian at times, including Peterson today. But you're seeing this up close and personal. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think the important thing that you want to, if you're someone who likes the glass half full, is that today, Peterson gave up a few runs and 3 runs in 4 innings. Not great location wise. Luis Rojas said is where he felt like a lot of that, Peterson didn't execute, but he said in terms of the velocity and whatnot, like for that where Peterson usually is 93, 94, he thought the stuff was good and that was encouraging. And I think that's what you're looking for. Of course you would like to see great results, but I think the Mets, especially, you're looking for like how the stuff looks. If it's crisp, you got to locate. That's a big thing too. You got to execute. But if he doesn't have a major velo dip right now, he is healthy, I think that's a start. And he looked good in his previous outing too. So not super discouraging there, at least in my opinion. Jordan Yamamoto looked great. Again, like holding spring training results, in hand. But hey, he faced on Saturday in West Palm, faced a lineup that you could see the Nationals using on opening day. And he cruised through the first inning until, giving up a run. But even after that, put together a couple 1, 2, 3 innings. He looked good. The stuff was crisp. He was getting some easy outs. He was locating. And I think that was a very, like, the Mets will take that. I think he went 3 1/3 innings, so he got the 4 up downs. And the Mets will take that, especially from a guy who is going to be probably a depth starter for this team, this organization, a good depth piece, and he's still young. The Mets are going to take that every time, especially because they're going to have other guys who could give them length, out of the pen. Now, whether they go with a long man in the pen on opening day on the roster or not, that remains to be seen. But yeah, so the other guy you have is Joey Lucasy, who obviously features that changeup curveball with some action there. And they've gotten to see him a little bit. It seems like he and David Peterson are fighting for that 5th starter spot. And with the rookie season he had, I would think unless something happens, David Peterson, they know a little bit more about him right now, might have the edge there. I don't know that for certain. I haven't heard anything about that, but the interesting part of that is that when we talk about how, every executive in history has said it, you can never have too much pitching. That's the deal here is with the Carrasco question mark. He feels confident he's going to be ready for opening day, but we just don't know if that's, his confidence because he's dealt with this elbow soreness before, or if he's being a little too ambitious there and just positive. These things usually work themselves out. So you can expect David Peterson to contribute for this team. Joey Lucasy, Jordan Yamamoto, they've got, and they've got strategies. Like a lot of teams are considering the 6-man rotation or the openers for this year with ramping guys up after a short season. So it's like the Mets, have remained open-minded to all those possibilities. So those 3 guys are squarely in the mix at the back end of the rotation, but more so if you're talking about the 5th starter spot, more so David Peterson and Joey Lucasy. But it just goes to show the depth that they've built and really how talented this roster is, that David Peterson, after a very strong rookie year in a weird season at that, isn't guaranteed a spot.
Now let's look at the top of the rotation, and I think one of the great questions that has come from the folks on the beat came from Ed Coleman to Jacob Degrom earlier this week when he was asked, do you plan to give your infielders any workouts? The question also could be, are you going to let the opposing batters get any work in either? Because Degrom looks masterful out there in spring training, and to the best of my knowledge, I mean, this is mid-season form we're looking here. I mean, if anything explains how special Jacob Degrom is, it's what we're seeing right here. Those numbers are sick.
Yeah, that is like, you can, hold a caution to the wind on spring training, just because you just never know what's going to happen in the regular season. But sometimes you just watch the guy and it's just not fair. And I hate to gush too much because it's like, you want to remain objective, but objectively, it's just ridiculous. I find myself always in stories writing like arguably the best pitcher in baseball to cover myself because it's like not a fact, but it's really becoming very hard to make an argument for anybody else. And you saw it, a few days back where those poor guys, those poor Astros in West Palm, they wanted to get some of the reserve summit bats in a spring training game, and they've got to go against Jacob Degrom, and he just carved them up over 3 perfect innings. He clocked, he hit 100 miles an hour in every inning, more than a handful of times throughout his outing, 35 pitches, easy. And he could have just thrown the fastball like he did in his first outing. He was primarily fastball in that first outing and did just fine. Second outing, he wanted to mix in the slider. And that was pretty devastating. You could just see like the body language of the hitters, the Astros, as they were going back to the dugout, was like they were bewildered, didn't know what hit them. And Degrom looks, like you said, the calendar for him might as well read like March 14th, July 14th instead of March 14th, because he is in midseason form, as cliche as that sounds. But I think that's the only way to put it, just because he's hitting, himself, his velocity looks great. And the stuff looks crisp too, with the slider. But I think what's going to be big with him is, locating. Huh? Oh, I'm doing a Zoom interview right now. Yeah. We don't even know who you are. Oh, I was media. You just. Okay. Okay. Cool. 5:45. Okay. Let's go. We don't know who you are. Where you came from. All right. Thanks. All right. Sorry. They're closing up here, but. Yeah, so Jacob Degrom, not to ramble too much, but he did look in midseason form. I mean, with him, what you're looking for is not only the velocity, but the location. And he's been pinpoint. I think he missed on one slider near the dirt the other day. And then he had another one that went a little higher than he would have liked. But I think, let's start walking out here. I think they're pleased with him, and Luis Rojas said it best when he said that, I'm really not watching Jay because they know what they're going to get from him. And I think that's the biggest point to know about Degrom right now, is that that's his biggest compliment, is that you don't wonder who's going to be starting on opening day. You kind of know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I think about negatively, and it's just from past years and the past luck, if you will, is please, Jake, don't get hurt out there during spring. I mean, that's kind of especially that ramped up. But I think we've gotten used to it to this point that I don't feel quite as nervous anymore about it. There are a couple of, very few spots that are left on the roster. The injury to Jose Martinez obviously kind of looks like it opens up a bench spot. What are you hearing as far as the depth of the roster looking like coming for opening day?
Right. Yeah, that's the biggest thing is the Jose Martinez injury, unfortunately, because he looked like he could have been a valuable bench bat for them with how he hits lefties, and that's something they needed because they're a very lefty heavy lineup. So coming off the bench there from the right-handed side would have been very valuable. He tears his meniscus. Now you've got a situation where it looks like the other guy with options, minor league options, Albert Almora, is probably going to make the roster, especially because he's showcased great defensive ability. He made one diving catch last week, and then another great running catch a few days ago in the outfield. And at the plate, I mean, he said, I asked him yesterday how he's, can repeat his production there from a couple seasons ago when he was in Chicago, because he did have a couple decent offensive seasons there. And he said that his mindset playing the game is just completely different this year. And I think, he's working with Chili Davis, a guy he worked with in Chicago. He's reunited with him. I think that could help. But in terms of the depth of the roster, I think that last spot's going to go to him, because I think if you project out the bench now, without Jose Martinez, they can't afford to go with Almora and Pilar. I think those two guys, if you look at them, that's the biggest thing that strikes me. One of the biggest things that strikes me about this bench is that the fans have had to put up with the Keon Broxtons and the Juan Lagares, all but one, the one good season he had. But these backup outfielders are a lot better than what Mets fans have been used to for the previous few years. And I think that's a good thing. And then you look at Jonathan VR, another guy that can play multiple positions, give them a lot of versatility. He's still a pretty decent bat. I mean, he's a guy who could maybe start on a team here in the, a weaker team, but wanted to go to a contender. And then you have, of course, the guy we just spent a lot of time on, Luis Guillermo, I think is, like I said, as underrated as the guys you're going to come across. He can play multiple positions in that infield, and he, had a better offensive season last year. And I think the depth, what we're hearing a lot is just a lot of the versatility about how these guys can play multiple positions. And really, Jose Martinez could have been used for the bat, but he was really the only one who, he can play multiple positions. I don't know how comfortable, the numbers say they shouldn't be comfortable with him out there at first or in the outfield, unless it was a dire situation. But the other, the bench as a whole looks really strong. And I think they've got good depth options that'll end up in Syracuse too. But I think it's going to be a better bench than we've seen in the recent years.
Well, the last question for me, and it's the one I know the answer to. I hate to even bother asking, but I also don't want to deal with the tweets that'll come at me if I don't. Obviously, a lot of people are curious about extensions for Conforto and Lindor. What, if anything, are you hearing?
Yeah, so the Mets, according to reports, were supposed to, kick those conversations this week, but it's been business as usual for Lindor and Conforto in terms of playing baseball. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing for them is they want to play baseball, let the agencies handle, the representatives handle that stuff. They've both answered. It's funny because they both, they know the question's coming every time they speak publicly, but it's something that you look at for the Mets, with Lindor especially, that they almost have to get it done because they did also get Carrasco, but they gave up two major league shortstops and two, pretty good, prospects with some upside to get Lindor and Carrasco. So they've really, you don't ever want to label it like this, but they really have no choice in that sense. The Conforto one we'll see there especially because Sandy Alderson said a couple weeks ago that, had they signed George Springer, who wanted, 6 years versus the 5, maybe it precludes them from re-signing Conforto, but then they went out and they aggressively pursued Bauer and offered him a lot of money. So, it's almost like a Lindor first. It feels like Conforto's a little on the back burner there, but Zach Scott has said before that there's definitely ways and room to negotiate with both and do two at the same time.
Well, it should be interesting. I would assume that'll be one of the major storylines going forward the rest of spring training, up until the self-imposed deadline that Lindor said once the season gets started, he wants to concentrate on that. But we still have a couple of weeks to go, and I know you're heading out of PSL, but certainly lots to cover. You're doing a great job down there, and especially I point people to a great article you did the other day on Cleon Jones, which is a must read at NorthJersey.com. Make sure people that you check that out, and check out Justin at NorthJersey.com. Well, next time we talk to you, you'll be back in the tri-state, so certainly appreciate your time and checking in from Clover Park in Port St Lucie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Absolutely. Justin Toscano joining us. And that, of course, Justin Toscano, NorthJersey.com. And I mentioned it towards the end of the interview there. He wrote an amazing article last week on the post-retirement life of Cleon Jones and the works that he's doing in his hometown. And, it's some of his stuff is behind a paywall, but I can tell you right now, it's worth it. So, you may want to wait for a deal. I get it. But if you're going to pay for one author on the beat these days, I'm going to endorse that you check out Justin, because he writes really thoughtful stuff, and and he's really cool about hanging with us. But I would have said that a year ago too when we were doing shows. Justin Toscano is the one guy who every article he writes, I want to read.
Yep, very reminiscent of our old buddy Jared Diamond, writes in a very similar style, and that was a phenomenal article he wrote. And I'm definitely going to do what I can to get Cleon on the show before too long to talk a little more about what he's doing in his hometown.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we love our 69 Mets, we love our 86 Mets, but knowing how some of them are giving back, it's just extra special. And those 69 Mets, they'll be the first to tell you they're not the youngest of the young. So knowing that that they're spending their 70s, in some cases 80s, doing this stuff is really that warms me, man. That really warms me, and makes me proud to be their fan.
Yeah, absolutely. We've always had some great ambassadors of the baseball community on the team, particularly on the 69-86 Mets. And it's just great to see that continuing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we look forward to having Justin back with us. Jared should be joining us actually in a few weeks as well. He came out with a book last year in the midst of the pandemic, so we want to make sure we give that some love, because it's a fantastic book that unfortunately much of the early publicity and book tour and all that type of stuff was wiped out by COVID. So want to make sure that we give Swing Kings a good plug here in a couple weeks. If you haven't read it already, just type in Jared Diamond at Amazon and buy the book. So I mean, definitely pick up Swing Kings. It's a fantastic look at the phenomenon surrounding the home run in modern baseball. And speaking of, we've had a couple pitchers now, EJ, talk about the baseball in spring training, and they're noticing some differences.
Yeah, real quick as an aside on the Swing Kings thing, if you're listening to this, you know what? Tweet at us and tell us when you were a kid playing some sandlot ball or some wiffle ball, who you emulated as your batting stance, because that became a topic on Twitter the other night, and there's some really funny responses. So I'd love to hear some of yours. And as far as the baseball goes, yeah, it definitely seems like last year where the pitchers were none too pleased. It seems like there's I don't want to say a dead ball, but I think we've possibly reached what could be considered a happy medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, as we've seen, Pete Alonso still highly capable of launching them into the stratosphere. But if the pitchers are happier, then, I think we've got a good, like you said, a happy medium. And for the record, for me, it was Darryl Strawberry right down to the butt wiggle.
I was the Tuffle Shuffle all the way.
Oh, you got to do the Tuffle Shuffle, man. You got to do the Tuffle Shuffle. So, looking forward, I mean, I got to tell you, the various things that are going on, I've kind of watched the scores a little bit, but in watching the games, it really is a different atmosphere. We talked about it with Justin Toscano a few moments ago, but it really is an air of optimism, an air of changed culture, an air of basically a new era. I mean, you've had an owner who's come to visit, but realistically, so is Fred Wilpon. But it's a new era of Mets baseball. And I got to tell you, we talked about it with Luis Guillermo earlier. The air of optimism is what makes this season for me so exciting. You've got people who really want to be here. You've got people who are really having fun. I mean, watching, I think it was midweek last week when Francisco Lindor was getting his lessons on how to operate the TV camera. And did so for a little while. And, these are the kind of things that you love seeing in your players. And, the on the field performance isn't that important. One of the things I wanted to bring up, though, was, sometimes you can't control your own circumstances. We've talked about that on the show a while. In that I hate blaming a player for the trade he was involved in. And, there are definitely a percentage of our fan base that will never forgive the fact that Edwin Diaz was traded for Jared Kelenic. But Edwin has shown yet again this spring how he is one of the most dominant closers in baseball. And I kind of wanted to get your take on what you've thought of him so far. I thought the guy is almost as on fire as Jake. But, at the same time, what's it going to take for some of this fan base to accept this guy on something that not only was nothing to do with him, now has nothing to do with anybody remotely involved in the team?
I mean, Sweet Sugar has been just that. He has been sugar this preseason so far. Like maybe he just needed a cookie added to the team. But you're right. He's looked absolutely filthy, particularly his secondary pitches, which is where he would fall behind in recent years and have to rely solely on that fastball, has just been snapping out of his hand. It's looked as electric as we've seen it in a Mets uniform. And I think he is really, really primed to firmly take back that closer role and thrive in it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I've stated many times that having watched him come up as a Seattle Mariner up here in the Northwest, I've been a fan of his for a long time. I was excited for the trade, even if I didn't really approve of all the talent going to Seattle. Although Seattle has managed in that in their LOL Mariners moment to really kind of piss off Kelenic with the leaked. Now former president of is it the CEO or whatever it was that went and spoke to the group that basically gave away all of his confidential information about negotiations. So congratulations, Jared Kelenic, on your pending free agency in 6 years. But it was a disappointment to see how things turned out in 2019. But as I said to someone just yesterday, I give him credit because his secondary pitches suffered because of that baseball in 2019. But you know how many times he sat there and blamed the ball? Zero. He took it himself. He took the heat. He took he took it all. And he said, I've got work to do. And he did that work, even though I'm still convinced half of that was the ball and half of it was psychological, going back to the ball. And obviously once the crowd got in his head, which can happen in New York, you have that too. But I really give him credit for doing the work the past 2 years to get back to being an elite closer, which I think he's done. And I think we may find that the Edwin Diaz that we see this year, and I'm not making a prediction yet because we're not doing those for a couple of weeks. We just talked about that. But the not quite prediction is I think he's primed for his best season in the majors. And if you look at his stats, that's saying a hell of a lot.
I think this bullpen is primed to being, if not the best in the National League, certainly in a conversation of top three. Because if you've got him performing like that, Familia's looked good. I mean, Trevor May's looked great. Granted, he gave up one the other day that was very wind aided. But I mean, this bullpen just looks like it is put together. You've got guys who aren't going to make this team that could arguably be in the bullpen for half of the other teams in the league on their major league roster. So I really think this bullpen is just one other element of this team to be excited about.
Yeah, I mean, the only one that doesn't seem to be carrying quite his weight yet is Betances, and you kind of hope that he's just working through some stuff and working with some stuff, because you're almost to a point where, statistically speaking, you could carry somebody else and be more justified about that contract. You're not cutting him just yet, that's for sure. So you just got to hope he turns around.
The good thing is he hasn't lost any zip on his fastball.
Nope.
He's still getting it up there in a hurry. So you're hoping that with some tweaking and Hefner working with him, that he'll be able to find it. And I kind of have a feeling if you're out there in the bullpen with a bunch of guys who all seem to get along and are all performing well, that's just going to rub off on you, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the thing. It's a group mentality, and I think that's partially why sometimes you see, especially relief pitchers go through essentially slumps. You have a group attitude, and I've seen the bullpen go on a slump before, and it can be all for one and one for all. So I mean, um it's a great attitude. I think the Mets have a great positioning with that. I think the only real question mark right now is who makes that 25th slot from the bench with Jose Martinez down for several months. And the other question is, who's your number 5 starter coming out of spring training? And obviously, will Carrasco be healthy for it? But the for opening day. But the only thing I've noted to Justin was the fifth pitch, the fifth slot. I mean, everyone's done well, but nobody has set themselves apart yet.
No, I think that's fair to say. It's good to have that competition
Yep.
right now. It drives guys to get better. They've still got some weeks here to really somebody to step up and take the reins, and I'm pretty confident that someone will. But the good news is, unlike a lot of years in the past, if the person who does end up winning that spot falters in April, they could probably be rotated out as early as May with another guy willing to step up and take that role.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things when you get down to the last week of spring training and you're going, and I'll just use David Peterson as the example since he was with us last year. Well, David Peterson has pitched a little bit better than Lucasy and Yamamoto, but so we'll carry him. What a great place to be where you have two guys. It's not a matter of, well, these are the two guys that we signed in the free agent market. We really can't cut either of them, so we'll bring them both. Let's do that. Of course, if any of them get hurt, we're kind of stuck. So, I mean, this is what depth is, and this is good depth when you really have to look at the three-way conversation on your fifth starter and go, technically speaking, I could take any of them.
Exactly. That's absolutely the case. It was interesting the other day, somebody was saying, I guess Vegas put the Mets over under number at 92 and asked what everybody thought of it. And I'm not going to give a firm prediction today, but I will say I went over solely for the reason of depth. They are so deep, both in pitching, to have 2 extra major league caliber starting pitchers that could potentially not be in the rotation to start the season. And then I really don't know. The way that it looks like the bench is going to be composed, this is the deepest bench that the Mets have had, and I don't even know how long. So it is certainly, to have this depth out there is just going to be something. I think that when you get to those dog days of summer, if Louis decides, hey, you know what, I'm going to give 3 guys a blow today and put 3 fresh bodies in there, it can happen and can still be successful.
And speaking of Louis, I mean, obviously the main thing we've seen from him is, these Zoom press conferences. But I've got to say that, I mean, from my observation, I feel like this is a guy who is coming into his own as a manager, and he seems more confident when he's speaking to the media. He seems more firm, less certainly less like he's been handed talking points by upper management, that's for sure. That he's speaking for himself more and as a baseball person. And I've got to say, I mean, the growth I've seen just in 12 months with Rojas is significant.
Totally agree with you there. I think he's definitely speaking off the cuff, and I think that's a safe place for the Mets to be, given all their PR gaffes in the past. I don't think he's the type of guy who's going to say something and embarrass the organization. And you can really tell. One thing I said when we hired him is, I love the fact that we're staying youthful on the manager side, and you can tell the youthful enthusiasm that he has. That as much as his players are loving being part of this team and playing baseball, he's loving just as much being around these guys and managing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing you could safely say about Luis Rojas is, regardless how long he is the Mets manager, and certainly, as Sandy's guy, but not Sandy's guy, in the sense that obviously they worked together for many years during Sandy's first tenure. You understand a little bit if they made a move after the season, but I certainly don't hope for it. I don't, I'd like to think that he's going to earn the stay, but one way or the other, this is a guy with a future in managing, and I think it's going to be a significant future in managing, and I think he is going to be one of the really, truly good managers, regardless of where he winds up, which is why, by golly, I want him here.
Absolutely. And I don't see any reason he shouldn't be. Barring the most catastrophic injuries known to Major League history, this team should be a very competitive team this year. And with him at the helm, I think it's a good possibility that he's around for a long, long time.
Absolutely. Well, sir, it's been a pleasure getting together with you and talking some Mets baseball. We'll definitely do it again next week, and we'll have probably have a guest as well. We'll kind of take that by as we play it by ear, especially this time of year, as we see what things develop. And we've got some more games this week. I certainly wish we could watch more of them. I think one of the downsides of many of us still being in work from home mode and whatnot is that. We wish we could watch spring training baseball more than we get to off of the corner of our eye. But this has been a fun spring so far. I feel enthusiastic. I feel excited, and we'll as far as the over under on the 92, I'll tackle that in 2 weeks. But I think I certainly lean right now to where you're at with the over. Any final thoughts, my friend?
That's it. I'm with you. I wish we could watch some more baseball. And is there anything worse than today, where there's absolutely no baseball activity in spring training? These are the days that really just seem to drag, because not only can you not watch baseball, but you're getting nothing out of spring training today. So let's have a quick sleep here and get back to it tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And also wanted, before I forget, I would be extremely remiss if we didn't send a shout out to our good friend, Michael Barron, who joined us about 2 months ago now. And he's had a hell of a run of it. He's been very open about the fact that he had a very bad case of the COVID-19. And during the midst of that, his doctors discovered that he has cancer and will be undergoing treatment for that. So we want to send our best wishes out. Hopefully, as treatment allows, you'll be able to join us so we can give him those positive vibes in person. But he's a great guy. He's a great friend of ours, and we want nothing but the best for him, especially with many, many more years of his friendship and Mets observations.
Given the live tweeting that he does during the games right now, updating stats and things of that nature, I think if anybody could use more baseball right now, it's our buddy Michael. We send him the best, and fortunately, they caught it early. Good prognosis, but we're all pulling for you at the recap, buddy.
Absolutely. And we'll talk to you soon, my friend. And my friend, we will talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Until then, LFGM.